Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to understand the rationale behind the demand for the legalization of the minimum support prices and what negative impacts it can have on Indian economy. Then in the second topic, we'll try to explore the loopholes which exist with the digital security infrastructure when it comes to the regulation of artificial intelligence. Then from your simplified section, we'll be taking up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide the much important value addition and practice questions keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2025. So stay tuned. The article puts light on the recommendation of the parliamentary panel to actually provide statutory backing to the minimum support prices and the challenges that can actually emerge from the same. This issue of MSP actually forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of agriculture pricing. So let's first try to understand what is this minimum support price which often makes the headlines. Very recently, there has been call by the Indian farmers for Delhi Chalo to actually demand for the legalization of the minimum support prices. This idea of Delhi Chalo is also synonymous with one of the freedom movements which took place. So can any one of you in the comment box can just tell me that this idea or call of Delhi Chalo was made during which satyagraha? Now coming back, let's try to understand what is this minimum support price. So this is basically a kind of a minimum price or a floor price which is actually decided by the government for various Rabi and Kharif crops, which actually act as a kind of a guarantee. Remember, not a legal guarantee, but a guarantee to the farmers that, okay, let's say for example, if you as a farmer, you are going to any market or APMC Mandi and you are going to sell your produce. But if that produce, for that you are not going to get this much of a minimum amount, then the government is actually going to intervene on your behalf and procure the product at this minimum support price. Remember that it is also the price that government agencies actually pay whenever they procure any kind of a particular crop. So you guys can recall that when Food Corporation of India is actually procuring staple food grains to actually provide subsidized food under National Food Security Act of 2013, it is procuring that from the farmers at the rate, and that rate is minimum support price. Now the question arises, why only a guarantee, not a legal guarantee? Because there exists no statutory backing currently, or there is no act of the government which actually mandates to buy these products from the farmers at this minimum support price. Currently, the government actually fixes MSP for 23 crops. Which are those 23 crops? Also asked in prelims. So there are 7 cereals. For example, your rice, wheat, barley, jawar, bajra, maize and ragi. There are 5 pulses: gram, arhar ki dal, moong ki dal, urad ki dal, lentils, etc. 7 oil seeds: groundnut, mustard, soybean, sunflower, sesame, safflower and Niger seed. Other commercial crops: 3, raw cotton, raw jute, copra. And then the government also fixes fair and remunerative prices for sugarcane as well. So you guys can note this down because it can appear in your prelims as well. Now the idea is that, okay, we have understood that there is no legal backing for MSP, but what is the idea of backdrop? What was the evolution of MSP looked like? So the government actually introduced this minimum support prices in the mid-60s when India was actually facing a food deficit or food crisis. Several reasons were there for that. For example, during the partition, the various fertile areas where the large-scale staple crop production used to take place were actually partitioned to the regions of modern-day Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, etc. And that is why the food production had actually come down by the year of 1957 to a 5-year low as 62 million tons. And that is why India by that time had also become dependent on the food aid by the US, such as for example, we were actually importing PL 480 grains from that, and under this program the wheat which was being procured by us was so derogatory in the quality that it is said that it was fit for the consumption of pigs only. At the same time, we were also facing war-like situations, such as for example in 1960 with China, or for example in 1965 with Pakistan. So the government obviously had to put a lot of impetus to actually increase the domestic production of the food crops. And for that purpose, the Green Revolution was brought in the year of 1967, where the impetus was on what? Impetus on the use of high yield variety seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. But the farmers were actually apprehensive. They were saying that, okay, let's say for example, I'm going to apply this new technology of Green Revolution. I'm going to procure this high yield variety seeds, this fertilizers like urea, etc. But that will obviously increase what? My input cost. So my input cost is increasing, and what if I go to the market and I do not fetch a good price for that? So I am going to incur a loss. So why I am going to change my farming method? This is where the government actually intervenes and creates the Agriculture Price Commission in 1965. And the Dantwala committee, which was actually established to actually suggest for the reforms in the agriculture, it recommends for the first time the idea of a minimum support price as a kind of a guarantee to the farmers that you use these Green Revolution technologies and we are going to procure at a minimum price, guaranteeing that to you. Obviously not a statutory backing. Then for the first time, MSP for wheat was actually introduced in the year of 1966. And this Agriculture Price Commission actually transformed and took its current name, and that is Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices, in the year of 1985, where, remember, it is not a statutory body, it is only an advisory body under the Ministry of Agriculture, which recommends for the minimum support price. It is eventually decided by the central government and specifically the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. So when we have understood this MSP, just look at the rates here. So when it was actually introduced in the year of 1966, the rate was around 52 rupees per quintal. By the time of 1970, it increased to 76. By the year of 2020, it increased to 1975 rupees. So can we just make a simple idea from here that the procurement cost for the government has increased consistently? Keep this in mind. Now, how this minimum support price is actually determined. So the CSCP, when it is determining the MSP for every Kharif and Rabi cropping season, it does so that by doing a simple calculation. So when a farmer grows a crop, he actually insures certain cost in that, the input cost, and that can be explicit and implicit or basically unpaid. So what are the costs which are being incurred by the farmer? First is A2. A2 covers what? It basically covers all your cash and in-kind expenses, such as, for example, the cost on seed, fertilizers, chemicals, hired labor, fuel for, let's say, irrigation pumps, irrigation, etc. Then FL, or family labor, basically includes the actual cost plus an imputed value of unpaid family labor. Imputed here basically means that this cost is basically made on assumption and not on any kind of real transaction or wages which has been paid. To understand this, let's say for example, I am growing 1 kg of onion in 1 hectare of land, and to do that I require only 2 labor, right? So one is me and one is my other brother. But now let's say in total I have 4 brothers. 2 of them were actually working in the cities earlier. But now because of the Industry 4.0, their skills are not being matched and a large scale job layoff has taken place because of automation. So these 2 laborers has now again joined the fields, but obviously the production will still remain the same from the very same land. Again, am I paying any kind of wages to my brothers? Obviously not. So that belongs to unpaid family labor, and that is also included when we are calculating the cost of MSP. Then when the Agriculture Commission or the Swaminathan Commission was established, it also provided to include the cost of C2. What does C2 includes? It basically includes the revenue which has been foregone on the owned land. So if I was using that land for any other purpose, let's say for example establishing a small industry, the revenue which is I am foregoing on that, or a kind of an opportunity cost, or the fixed capital asset on which I am paying some interest. So let's say for example I have hired a tractor or kind of a pesticide spraying machine or something. So for this fixed capital asset, if I am paying any interest, the Agriculture Commission said that we shall include this as well. But currently the government calculates this minimum support prices only on this A2 plus FL and does not include the C2 cost. So what are the factors which are considered by CSCP when it is calculating? First is the cost of production. Then the changes if it has taken place in the input prices. So let's say for example, if the prices of fertilizers has been increased, the input cost has been increased, the MSP will increase as well. The trends which are taking place in the market situation, the demand and supply situation which exist. Then the government also does the intercrop price parity. So it cannot go like that, okay, MSP for rice is going to be substantially high than other MSP included crops. So then obviously all the farmers will start producing this water intensive rice only. So intercrop price parity is taken care of. Then we also see the effect on general price level, or basically the inflation. Let's say for example the consumer price index combined basis, the effect which it can have on the cost of living. Keep this in mind that the international market price situation is also calculated, and the imputed value of family labor is calculated, but imputed value of wages to the family labor is not, because obviously we cannot calculate the wages which we are giving to our family members. Then the interest on fixed capital not included. Why? Because C2. Imputed rent for owned land not included. Rent paid for any leased land not included. So these are the factors or C2 costs which are not considered. What are the other factors which the government is currently considering when it is deciding MSP? So Swaminathan Commission has recommended that the MSP which shall be decided, it has to be minimum 50% more than the weighted cost of production. So let's say for example, if to produce 1 kg of onion, I am incurring a cost of 100. The Swaminathan Commission said that the MSP shall be at least 150 rupees. Second, this was actually accepted by the government in the budget 2018-19, where it said that now the MSP will be at least 1.5 times of all India weighted cost of production. Over and above this, the states has to power to actually declare any kind of bonus if they want over the minimum support prices. Now let's try to understand that why there is this rising demand for the legalization of the MSP. First, let's try to understand this. Let's take this year's wheat for instance. So MSP which was announced by the government, that was 1975 rupees per quintal. And if we include the A2 plus FL cost, or the input cost for the farmers which it incurred to actually grow this quintal of wheat, that was only 960 rupees. So that is basically a profit of 1015 rupees per quintal. That is almost 105% return over A2 plus FL. But remember that the government is not considering what? The C2 cost. So if we include the C2 cost as well, then the return will be only 34% with all the risk which the farmer has taken. That is why the farmers are demanding for a legal backing of MSP where this C2 cost is also included. Then let's try to understand that there was a kind of a report which was actually published by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in the June 2024 itself, where it actually made a serious claim, and it said that the Indian government is actually kind of providing negative support to the farmers. So basically we are not positively supporting them, negatively supporting them. Let's try to understand that. So let's say for example the MSP for the wheat in the year 2021-2022 was 1975 rupees. In the next year, it was actually increased to 2015 rupees. So that is a nominal percentage increase of 2%. So now you are basically saying that, okay, so the prices are increasing, MSP is increasing, farmers are making more profit. Let's try to understand this by a simple logic. We say that the onion which I was selling earlier was 100 rupees. Now, next year, the government has actually increased to 102 rupees. So basically, you are saying that the income of the farmer has increased. But at the very same year, during that financial year, the inflation rate or consumer price index combined was 6%. So basically, this onion is now actually being sold at 106 rupees. That means that I am incurring actually a loss of rupees 4 per quintal. So basically, because I am not getting any benefit from this market rate or this inflated rate. First thing. Second thing, let's say for example that if earlier my earning was 100 rupees and with that I could have actually paid the tuition fees for my child who is preparing for UPSC, let's say for example. Now my income has increased in the next year, it has increased to 102 rupees. So now when I'm going to pay the fees, the tuition center is saying that no, because of inflation we have increased our fees to 106 rupees. So does my real income has increased? No. Am I able to actually pay for more things as a farmer? No. So I am basically incurring what? A negative, kind of a negative loss, and in real comparison I am incurring a loss. So that is basically the negative support which is being provided to the farmers by the government. Thus, the government is actually, the farmers are actually demanding for the legal backing. But such legal backing is also involved with several issues. First is obviously that if, as we have saw, that the kind of procurement cost has consistently increased for the products of MSP. So for example, currently for wheat it is around 2,200 rupees per quintal. So when the cost for the government is increasing, at MSP. Now try to understand this, that when we are saying that the Food Corporation of India under the National Food Security Act 2013 is actually procuring the food from the farmers. At what rate? At MSP. The MSP which has been consistently increasing. Now under NFSA, we are providing subsidized food to 75% of our rural population and 50% of our urban population. But we are providing that at a consistent subsidized rate, that is basically a central issue price. And this subsidized rate has not increased since the year of 2005 and 6. So basically the incurring cost for the government is increasing, but the revenue which it is kind of extracting from this subsidized rate, that is stagnant over the years. So because of that, there is a huge expenditure which the government is incurring on itself. Obviously that will lead to what? A huge fiscal burden to the government. So when the finance minister is saying that we are actually envisaging to reduce down our fiscal deficit to 4.5% of the GDP by the year of 2025 following the directives under the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act of 2003, obviously that does not seem like a possibility. Second is that there will be obviously less procurement due to the infrastructure issue. So first of all, the government is actually doing less procurement because of this fiscal burden issue. The second side of that is that, let's say for example, even if we are going to procure all the food which is being produced by the farmers, we do not have ample amount of storage infrastructure for that. The second side of the coin is that the recent developments which we have made in the cold storage infrastructure, because of that we have sufficient amount of stock to actually feed the population for a long period. So why we are unnecessarily going to procure more and more crops from the farmers? Obviously that is why the government procurement and production rate that actually shows a kind of variance. For example, just look at the production of rice and the procurement, that is only 43%, 36% for wheat, 29% for cotton, or as low as 8% for mustard. Then such over-reliance on MSP by the farmers can actually lead to what? Various kind of market distortion outcome. So for example, the market actually works upon what? Demand and supply mechanism. So let's say for a particular year, there is not much demand for the product of onion. Now if there is not much demand, obviously the farmers will fetch less price. But if there is a statutory backing, the farmer will say that no, I am not going to sell onion at this price. I will be only selling at MSP. So that will lead to hoarding, further kind of a political pressure on the government by this farmer organization. And this hoarding will do what? It will eventually create what? An artificial demand for the onion which does not exist. So that will eventually disrupt what? The demand and supply mechanism which exists. It will actually deter the various kind of private traders to enter into this market. Then there is also the serious issue of amber box subsidy. So let's try to understand this very succinctly. Amber box is basically a kind of a subsidy provided by the World Trade Organization, where it says that the government can actually provide subsidy to the farmers for the procurement of, let's say, fertilizers, seeds, for irrigation, etc. But such subsidy shall not exceed 10% of the total value of production in a developing country like India. So if we are going to, let's say, provide a statutory backing, then obviously the subsidy rate has to be below 10% only. It cannot increase in any circumstances. And the other countries can also challenge us at WTO as well. Then there are various green revolution issues, such as for example, non-diversification of crops. The farmers are still growing this rice, wheat, cotton, such water intensive crops only, sugarcane, etc. That is also impacting our groundwater table. So all of this is having actually a negative impact on the yield of the crop and the farm sector. Recently, the Standing Committee on Agriculture has actually recommended two things. First is to actually double the annual financial assistance under the PM Kisan Samman Nidhi. So PM Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is basically a kind of a central sector scheme, under which Rupees 6,000 is actually transferred annually to the cultivable land holding farmer families in 3 equal installment of Rupees 2,000 directly into their Aadhaar seeded bank accounts. So the panel has suggested that increase this amount, provide more direct benefit transfer to the farmers. So they actually demand less for the MSP. And at the same time, it has also said that provide a legal guarantee to the MSP to the farmers as well. The other suggestions made by the committee are what? It has recommended introducing a scheme to waive off the debts of the farmer, and recommended setting up a national commission for minimum living wages for the farm laborers to actually ensure their long due rights of farm labor. Also to compulsory provide universal crop insurance to the small farmers with land holding up to 2 hectares. So just note down these innovative suggestions, inculcate them when you are writing any question on the agriculture section. Try to attempt these prelims questions first, comment your answers and this mains question, and we move forward to the next news. The editorial today actually highlights the issues of data breaches and the shortcomings which exist with the Data Protection Act of 2023, specifically associated with the use of artificial intelligence in our country. And this forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of government policies and intervention. So first, let's try to understand what is the context of this artificial intelligence surveillance which has featured in the news today. So in 2019, the Indian government actually made headlines by announcing its intention to create the world's largest facial recognition system for the policing. And this artificial intelligence powered surveillance system is actually now being deployed across the railway stations, and the Delhi police is actually preparing to use AI for crime patrols as well. The latest plan also includes launching 50 AI-powered satellites, further intensifying India's surveillance infrastructure. These 50 satellites, which were actually announced by the ISRO chief, where he said that India is planning to launch 50 satellites for intelligence gathering in the next 5 years, where he proposed on the idea that there will be creation of a layer of different satellites in the different orbit, such as, for example, geostationary Earth orbit or the lower Earth orbit. And such satellites will be actually capable of imaging thousands of the kilometers of the area to actually track the movement of the troops. So for example, let's say there is a geo satellite which has a wider span area of coverage because it is kept at the orbit of around 36,000 kilometers. So let's say, for example, at line of actual control, there is some troop movement or deployment by China. So this geo Earth orbit satellite can actually look at that, observe it, and pass this task to the lower Earth orbit satellite, LEO satellite. And this LEO satellite can actually provide much higher resolution images and videos for what is exactly going on at LAC. The idea was that the current fleet which has been deployed by India of this artificial intelligence gathering satellite of 54 is actually not enough for the future needs as well, and the kind of various border aggregations which we are looking at because of our dear neighbors China and Pakistan. So let's try to understand first what do we mean by the artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence basically implies the use of computers and machine learning to perform several tasks which normally require a certain level of human intelligence. So for example, let's imagine that you are a lazy person. So you call upon your brother who is supposed to be studying at the adjacent room to actually hand over to you your mobile which was kept on the table in your room only. So you can conveniently call your girlfriend. Now this task of human intelligence, which basically requires to understand the kind of order which has been given to the brother and to actually execute the function, this can be replaced now by this artificial intelligence, such as for example Alexa. So you can just give a directive to this artificial intelligence tool Alexa, and that can actually make a call on your behalf as well. So this artificial intelligence basically consists of machine learning, which basically implies using sample data to train the computer programs to recognize various kind of patterns based on algorithm. Or for example, neural networks, the computer system designed to actually imitate the neurons in the brain, which actually functions upon the concept of Hebbian learning. The Hebbian learning for which this year's Nobel Prize was also given. The idea basically implies that, let's say for example, there is one neuron. If we keep on hitting this neuron with another neuron in a very long sequence, then over a period of time, these two neurons will get amalgamated together in such a way that they will actually form a chain reaction. This is exactly the phenomena on which the algorithm system of the social media works. So for example, you see one good reel on the message of love or something. After that, you watch 2 or 3 more and a kind of a pattern is formed and observed by the algorithm. So now you will be bombarded by these reels of love, eventually falling in love with someone who doesn't even know that you exist. Third is the natural language processing, the ability of these machine tools to actually understand speech as well as understand and analyze the documents as it is being done by ChatGPT. Or for example, robotics, where machines can actually assist people without actual human development. Now, when we talk about this artificial intelligence, there are basically 3 stages of development. First is the artificial narrow intelligence, which we are using very frequently in today's time, where these machines, they specialize only in one area and solves one problem, such as for example your Siri, Alexa, etc. The second is the artificial general intelligence, where this machine intelligence actually refers to a computer that is as smart as human across the board. The third stage can be the artificial super intelligence, where these machines will not only have the intelligence or intellect, but also will start developing what? A consciousness, where they will start developing a kind of a decision making power, where they will be much more smarter than the best human brains in practically every field. And what can be the potential uses of such stages of artificial intelligence, specifically in the context of governance? First can be obviously the enhancement of service delivery. So for example, we can actually use this artificial intelligence based automatic direct benefit transfer to the account of the beneficiary. Let's say for example, under your PM Kisan Samman Nidhi scheme, which we just studied. So under this PM Kisan Samman Nidhi, if we are doing this DBT through artificial intelligence, what it will lead to? So that will eventually reduce down the cost of transaction. That will actually reduce down the leakages which used to take place because of the various intermediaries. Then we can actually increase the productivity of social welfare schemes as well. So for example, imagine the use of artificial intelligence during the time of pandemic. So we could have actually tried to identify the hotspots which existed through this artificial intelligence. We could have actually predicted the kind of vaccine doses which would have been required. Then we would have actually tried to increase the supply chain, streamline it, and also kind of have a calculation over the stocks which we have. All of that could have done through the use of artificial intelligence. Further, it can actually enhance the ease of doing business as well. So for example, let's say that you have to open a new corporation, let's say power corporation. You want to start a new venture. But on the very same day, you also have got an appointment for a very auspicious meeting. So because of that, you do what? You direct your artificial intelligence tool. The AI tool actually kind of file the documents on behalf of you, takes the appointment, do all the documentation process, takes the approval, do the payment, and by the time you have returned back, you have actually started a new venture without even your physical presence. Similarly, such AI generative tools such as for example ChatGPT, your Flow artificial intelligence, all of these are actually being integrated into the corporation to actually meet the demand of Industry 4.0, such as for example in marketing, in the production designing, etc. Then we can also enhance our disaster preparedness and the risk reduction, where we can actually develop a lot of predictive and analysis tools. We can actually streamline our resources so that we can actually meet the United Nations kind of early warning system for all initiative, which actually envisages that each humans on the planet shall be protected under some early warning system by the year of 2027. It can have significant improvement in the healthcare as well. For example, use of telemedicine. We can under your e-Sanjeevani app, or for example, digitization of health record can take place under your Ayushman Bharat. Or you guys might can recall about the Deepfold, a kind of an AI predictive tool which was developed by the Google. So it actually analyzed 200 million protein structures, something which could have taken around 1000 million man years. So that saved us a lot of work. Then we can also have AI powered cyber security systems, where for example, let's say if a Trojan attack has taken place, so this AI actually learns from the kind of patterns on which the target was actually made, and by learning it can actually start automatically improving. Then we can have much better urban planning and city management. So to actually predict the peak hours of the traffic, to actually analyze and integrate the geospatial data, to actually implement that data for, let's say for example, creation of high performance building or transit oriented development systems, the kind of things which has been in the news recently. But with all these potential uses, there also exist emerging issues as highlighted in the today's article, where it says that such technological integration in law enforcement is commendable, but it raises substantial legal and constitutional concerns because of the emergence of a concept called as a dragnet surveillance, which basically refers to the indiscriminate data collection beyond just suspects or criminals by various government agencies. For example, with Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act (FISA) of the US, even the well-intended surveillance laws can actually result in infringing on the citizen's right of specifically what? The right to privacy. The right to privacy, which has actually been integrated and guaranteed under the Article 21, right to dignified life of the Constitution, as it was held in the landmark K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India Judgment 2017. The article suggests today that the information privacy shall be safeguarded against any kind of such ubiquitous data violence or data surveillance. So what are the issues which exist because of this exhaustive use of kind of this artificial intelligence? First is obviously the lack of proportional safeguards, and that can also be seen. So for example, let's say there is a government agency and that is collecting a lot of data of the people through this use of AI tools, right? So let's say for example, your facial recognition, your birth year, the choices which you have, the profession which you have, all of that. But such data breaches can actually compromise a lot of your activity. Let's say for example, your financial security as well. When it comes to this data protection infrastructure, we are lacking there in various terms, such as for example, if you look at the countries with the most data breaches, India actually ranked third in the year of 2023. There were various security snags which actually took place, such as for example, in May 2022, the Chinese hackers hit the Indian power grid during the December 2022. Or for example, the drug major Sun Pharma actually reported an information security incident. Or you guys can recall where Air India experienced a cyber attack that affected 4.5 million of the customers. So again, do we have a kind of a very strong and sound digital protection infrastructure? Absolutely not. To deal with that, what government did, it actually brought the Digital Personal Protection Act 2023. Where it stated what? That it will implement the security measures to protect user data with third-party processors. There will be a data protection board authority to actually recommend the sanctions for data breaches. There will be a minor concern, so there will be a guardian approval for processing data for minors as well as physically disabled. A kind of a data protection officer will be appointed. Any kind of data transfer overseas will actually be regulated by the central government, so the concept of data localization, right? And there will be hefty penalties and fair appeals as well. But today's article highlights that there exist several issues with the act, such as for example, section 7 clause G actually waives the consent when processing data for medical treatment during the epidemic, so the government can do that. Or for example, under section 7 clause I, it actually exempts the government from the consent requirement for processing data related to employment, and India is the largest employer in the world. So how much data breaches can take place? So the government has a kind of a blank authority there. Or for example, under section 15 clause C, the citizen shall not suppress any kind of material information when submitting personal data, and if does so, there can be a lot of punitive measures which government can take. So let's say for example, if there is any kind of misinformation in my Aadhaar card, which is a high possibility, so in that case what will happen? The government can take a lot of punitive measures. So basically the article suggests that there is a lot of blanket powers which has been given to the Indian government under this Digital Protection Act, Data Protection Act 2023. Thus, the article suggests that India shall actually envisage for adopting the global best practices, such as for example, what is our current India's model? So India has taken various initiatives to control the AI. Remember that the artificial intelligence regulation is not specifically mentioned in your Data Protection Act 2023. So we are regulating it through various other acts, such as for example, under your National Data Governance Framework Policy, or your AI for Bharat initiative, or the Artificial Intelligence Mission. But because there is a lack of such artificial intelligence regulation under the DPA 2023, it leads to what? Deployment of AI-powered facial recognition technology and CCTV surveillance at various public places, or no publicly available guidelines on how this data which is being collected by the government is being processed or stored. So what we shall envisage is to actually adopt the various global best practices, such as for example, the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act, which basically categorizes the use of artificial intelligence. So it suggests that, okay, this kind of use is completely prohibited. This kind of use will actually be applicable, right? For example, it categorizes this AI activities in a form that it prohibits real-time remote biometric identification by the law enforcement. So these are the kind of things which we shall implement to actually bring down kind of a AI Regulation Act. And in that act, the editorial suggests that we shall have a consent mechanism, a transparency report, as well as enough provision for judicial oversights as well. So keep these suggestions in your mind, try to attempt this particular question, and we move forward to the next news of the day, where we are going to read a very interesting explained article today, where the Donald Trump has actually said that the US is going to create a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So let's first try to understand that what is a strategic reserve first of all, right? So a strategic reserve is basically a stock of critical resource which can be released or can be used at a time of crisis or supply disruption. For example, the world's largest supply of emergency crude oil, or the largest reserve, is actually kept by the US Strategic Petroleum Reserves, right? Which was created when? It was created because of the Arab oil embargo which took place in the year of 1973-1974. Right? Remember that such reserves can be used in the extreme situations, just for example, when the hurricane hit the oil infrastructure around the Gulf of Mexico on US. So US actually utilized this strategic petroleum reserves which it has kept. Also keep this in mind that such strategic reserves need not to be restricted to oil. For example, Canada has the world's only strategic reserve of maple syrup, and for example, China has strategic reserves of metal, grains and pork products, etc. Does India also have a strategic reserve? So obviously yes, we do also have a petroleum strategic reserve. Why? Because just look at the kind of crude oil imports which we have. So basically we are dependent upon the 87% of import when it comes to our oil needs. Which is the country from where we are importing the most? So recently that has been Russia, followed by your Iraq, then comes your Saudi Arabia, then comes your United Arab Emirates. So these are the top 4 countries from where we are currently importing the crude oil. Now, in the time of, let's say, for example, some crisis or some global supply chain disruptions, we have also created strategic petroleum reserves, which was around 5.33 million metric ton in your SPR phase 1, that is strategic petroleum reserve phase 1, where we had kept that at your Vishakhapatnam, your Mangalore, your Padur, in these 3 places. In our SPR phase 2, we are further creating 2 more strategic petroleum reserves. One is your Chandi Khole at Odisha and other is your at Padur in Karnataka. So keep these locations in your mind. Now when we have understood the strategic reserves, what do we mean by Bitcoin? So Bitcoin is basically a kind of a decentralized cryptocurrency. When we say cryptocurrency, basically understand that we are meaning a kind of a virtual currency. When we are saying that it is decentralized, it basically means that it is not being issued by any kind of a central bank and it is not controlled by any particular individual, group or entity or bank per se. So this Bitcoin basically does not have any intrinsic value, but it acts as a money and a form of payment, and it functions upon what? It basically uses the blockchain technology. Blockchain technology basically works where the kind of any ledger system, and that ledger system is being controlled by the nodes of computer all across the world. Thus obviously not one single institution is controlling that. Now, when no single institution is controlling that, it also means that no single institution can actually manipulate the currency. How does this blockchain work? So let's say, for example, A wants to send money to B, and the transaction is actually represented online as a block. This block is broadcasted to every nodes or every party in that network. Those in the network approve that the transaction is indeed valid. So the block then can be added in the chain, which basically provides a kind of a transparent record of transaction which is available to everyone across the world. For example, when we are doing the transactions in our banks, so you guys don't know how much amount is being transacted in my bank, right, which is mostly around 1000 rupees a month. And this money then moves from A to B, right? So this is a kind of a very transparent, decentralized kind of a cryptocurrency function which works, and that is Bitcoin. Bitcoin was basically the first cryptocurrency. Now we have, let's say, for example, Ethereum is there, Litecoin is there, etc. Right? Now let's see how this Bitcoin mining actually works. So let's say, for example, there is Alice who wants to buy a product from Bob using the Bitcoin. So she uses her private key and signs a message with the amount of Bitcoin and request a transaction. The transaction request by Alice is actually bundled into the block with the transactions, the blockchain technology, broadcasted to all mining nodes, who is then going to do what? They are going to validate Alice transaction using algorithm in a process called mining. The first miner to validate such a new block for the blockchain will receive a portion of the Bitcoin as a reward. And this transaction is completed and the new block will be added to the blockchain, and the Bob has done what? It has basically received the Bitcoin from Alice. On the basis of this basic understanding of blockchain technology, try to solve this particular question, comment your answers. Now we'll try to understand that does India have a law on cryptocurrency? So what does the law says? First of all, try to understand this, that in our country it is legal to trade and hold cryptocurrency. Right? So basically, if you are having Bitcoin, you are not doing anything illegal. But at the same time, it is not assigned as a legal tender like the rupee which we have. What do we mean by this? So let's say, for example, you come to me, you give me, you say that, please sir, take this 2 Bitcoin, give me a Parle-G biscuit. I will be like, no, I'm sorry, because if I take this 2 Bitcoin for you and I will go to another shop and I will try to buy, let's say, for example, a SIM card or something, that person will say, no, give me the legal money which is authorized by the Central Bank of India, and that is rupee, that is not Bitcoin. So can you hold Bitcoin? Yes, absolutely. But is it a legal tender? No. So in 2018, basically, the RBI actually banned the cryptocurrencies like that to provide any kind of banking functions to these virtual digital assets. But in 2020, this action was overturned by the Supreme Court. And that is why it is actually legal to trade and hold cryptocurrency currently. Now, what are the regulatory measures which has been taken? So these virtual digital assets, they have been included in the Section 2, Clause 47A of the Income Tax Act. And from the budget 2022 onwards, the government is actually applying 30% tax on any kind of such transaction on these virtual digital assets, as well as 1% tax deducted at source if the income exceeds 50,000 rupees annually. From March 2023 onwards, this virtual digital assets has also been brought under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And the government was also envisaging a kind of a cryptocurrency and regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill 2021. The article today suggests that if you are going to make such Bitcoin reserves, it is going to have certain potential uses and risk as well. For example, it can actually help the US dominate the global Bitcoin market, and in the face of growing competition from China, where the most Bitcoin mining actually takes place. Remember that this Bitcoin mining is also responsible for a lot of greenhouse gas emission as well. The US can also reduce its deficit without raising the taxes, so that will actually strengthen the US dollar as well, because the large scale transaction can take place for a Bitcoin and a dollar. So the demand of dollar will increase, it will strengthen the US dollar, and that will in turn give the US more leverage over the foreign adversaries like China and Russia. So remember, when we're talking about the evolution of dollar as a kind of a global currency, right, in the context of de-dollarization of Indian economy. And what are the risks which are associated? So unlike most of other commodities, Bitcoin obviously has no intrinsic use and is not crucial obviously to the function of US economy. Then obviously the idea is that because it is so volatile, remember that when kind of Trump has, the Elon Musk had said about the dog coin. So the price of dog coin has actually skyrocketed and then it just fell immediately like that. So it presumes its value will continue to rise in the long term. The crypto wallets will remain kind of vulnerable to various kind of cyber attacks, and these cryptocurrencies are also being used for the various purposes of money laundering, so that is also a major issue. So remember this potential uses, this risk, the regulation of these digital currencies in our country, and we move forward to the next news, where a very interesting article today has appeared which talks about that what our constitution provides for the protection of minority rights. So let's first try to understand the origin of minority rights in our country. Well, the idea is that United Nations General Assembly, it actually adopted a kind of a declaration on the right of person belonging to any kind of national, ethnic, religious or linguistic minorities on December 18, 1992. And that is why the day today is actually celebrated as the Minority Rights Day. Now, the minority rights are very essential in democracy like our country because of this quote which you guys can note down by Franklin Roosevelt, who said that no democracy can long survive which does not accept as fundamental to its very existence the recognition of the rights of minorities in that country. This idea of minority rights actually originated from the Article 19 of the Austrian Constitutional Law 1867, which actually acknowledged the ethnic minorities, that they have a kind of an absolute right to maintain and develop their nationality and languages, which was then further replicated in, for example, Hungary's Act of 1868 or Constitution of the Swiss Confederation of 1874, which actually guaranteed kind of 3 languages of the country equal rights in civil services, legislation and courts. Then when the First World War took place, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of kind of apprehension toward the Jews, and that is why 5 treaties were negotiated between the Allies and the associated powers, such as, for example, Poland, Romania, Greece and Yugoslavia, where countries like Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary and Turkey, they actually declared that they will protect their minorities. What was this treaty? So this treaty was basically the Little Treaty of Versailles or Polish Treaty of 1919, where the kind of safeguards was forwarded to the minorities. Minorities, for example, Jews in the country of Poland and Romania, Muslims in Albania and Greece, or for example, non-Muslims in Turkey and Iraq. Then the Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in the year of 1948, gives every individual a right to community. That is what? That is right to enjoy their own culture and to participate in various kind of cultural forums and association. When we talk about in the context of British India, the idea of minority rights emerged from the demand of a separate electorate for the Muslims, because they form the kind of minority in the overall population, and thus their demands is being overshadowed by the majority, a kind of a claim which was put in the Shimla deputation in the year of 1906 by the Aga Khan too, and that is why the separate electorate was kind of started from your Molle Minto reforms of 1909. And this idea of separate electorate or providing a kind of rights to these minorities was accepted by the Indian National Congress in the Lucknow Pact of 1916, where Muslim League also agreed that it is going to kind of sponsor the demand of Home Rule League of the Indian National Congress. Can any one of you name that who was actually chairing this Lucknow session? Then comes your Nehru Report 1928, which specifically talks about providing reservation to the minorities and safeguarding their culture. The same idea of protecting these minorities as a fundamental right was also enshrined in the Karachi Resolution of 1931. Can any one of you tell me who was heading the Karachi session of 1931? Then specifically the idea to actually protect and safeguard the cultural rights of these minorities was put in the objective resolution, which was forwarded by Jawaharlal Nehru on 13th of December 1946 in the Constituent Assembly. Then when it comes to the context of independent India, the article today writes that how there was a resolution passed by G.B. Pant to actually establish a kind of advisory committee on fundamental rights and right of minorities. And who was heading this committee? It was actually Sardar Patel himself, which led to the inclusion of articles from Article 25 to Article 30 in our fundamental rights section in the part 3 of the Constitution, where the idea was that because India is a heterogeneous society, the protection of right of minorities actually forms the basis of multiculturalism altogether, right? So what is the rationale for this minority rights? The article today suggests that the rights which are provided, so for example, right to equality under Article 14, the freedom of speech and expression of an individual under Article 19, or the freedom to profess and propagate your religious practices under Article 25, that is not enough for the conservation of language or culture. And if, let's say, for example, if there is a kind of an individual, let's say if there is a community, kind of a minority, and that is being unjustly treated, so even though that does not have a direct kind of violation of the rights of an individual, but it leads to a kind of a subjects to ridicule or denied any value, which actually undermines the individual's right to dignity, which is guaranteed under the Article 21 of the Constitution, the right to dignified life. Thus, Article 29 and Article 30, which provides for various kind of linguistic rights and religious minority rights, that becomes necessary. To ensure what? To actually ensure non-discrimination. Such non-discrimination actually can lead to social cohesion under Article 51A. That is our fundamental duty. It is also essential to political stability and democratic security, and eventually to the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam and the Viksit Bharat by 2047. So now let's try to understand what are the minority rights which has been provided in the Constitution. Remember, the term minority has been used at 4 places in the Constitution, but there is no official definition of the term minority. The Supreme Court has held that such minority shall be determined on the basis of state level. So it's not like that, okay, only Muslims are the minority in our country. At various places, the Hindus forms minority in a particular state as well. Then there comes 2 articles. One is Article 29. What does Article 29 says? It basically provides protection to religious as well as linguistic minorities. It says that any section of citizens in any part of India which are having distinct language, script or culture of their own have the right to conserve the same. And no such citizen shall be denied admission into any educational institution which is maintained by the state or receiving aid out of the state fund on which grounds? Religion, race, caste or language. So remember, gender is not here. Then comes your Article 30. Article 30 says that all religious and linguistic minorities, very specifically, not any section of citizen, okay, all religious and linguistic minorities, they can establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. The 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978 stated, which actually deleted which particular right? Can anyone of you tell me? It deleted a very prominent right, made it actually a kind of a constitutional right only, not a fundamental right anymore. So after doing that, the same Constitutional Amendment of 1978 stated that the state can acquire such property of such minority educational institution, but due compensation shall be provided. Then such minority education institution can also impart education in their own language. And all the general laws of land, such as for example related to security, defense of our country, communication, all of that will equally applies to such minority institutions as well. So remember these two articles. Then there are certain important judgments which has featured today related to minority rights. First is obviously the Kerala Education Bill of 1957, where the Supreme Court held that this term educational institution will also include your universities. So the minority, any community can also establish their own universities. Second is, state cannot impose any such condition where the granting aid or giving affiliation that the institution shall require to surrender their minority character. So it is providing a kind of a blanket protection to these minority institutions. The state cannot put kind of undue pressure on them. The second judgment was St. Xavier College Society 1974 case, where the Supreme Court held that Article 30 ensures equality between the majority and the minority, and such right or protection is being derived to them because of their historical right. Then comes Keshwanand Bharti case, which says that the right which has been provided under Article 30 of the Constitution forms the part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So Parliament can amend it? Yes, but there will be a kind of a doctrine of judicial review which will be applied to that. Then comes your Aligarh Muslim University case 2024 very recently, where the Supreme Court held that the Article 30 is the facet of equality and non-discrimination, and a state cannot discriminate against the minority institutions while they are granting any kind of aid, right? So remember these important judgments, remember Article 29 and 30, and we move forward to the next news of the day, where we are going to actually read about the Fair Economy Pillar Agreement, which forms an important component of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So the idea was to actually counter the growing economic presence of China in the region of Indo-Pacific. The United States actually came with an initiative called as Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which was actually launched where? In Tokyo, Japan in the year of 2022, which is basically what? A US-led initiative for economic growth in the Indo-Pacific Agreement. Is it a kind of a free trade agreement? Absolutely not. So there is not a kind of a legal binding on the participating countries, including our country India. Rather, there are 4 important pillars on the basis of which the countries can just sign whichever pillar they want, but without any legal obligations. Remember it. One of the pillar is, for example, fair and resilient trade. One is your critical supply of minerals. One is related to, for example, your resource sharing and etc. So when it comes to these 4 pillars, India has joined all the 3 pillars except one where we have an observer status, and that is fair and resilient trade. Which are the countries which are actually participating in this? So there are currently 14 countries. Which are the 14 countries? There is India, Australia, Japan, Thailand, Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, New Zealand, United States, Republic of Korea, Brunei, as well as Fiji as well, right? Now just have a quick look at the kind of the economic importance of this framework. So for example, these countries basically represents what? 40% of the global GDP. The trade pillar, which is under the negotiation, it aims to increase the efficiency of doing business and the trade throughout, working towards paperless trade, cutting the red tapeism, providing greater certainty for the service exporters. Or for example, the supply chain resilience initiative, which actually aims to have a kind of a crisis response mechanism and supply chain in the region of Indo-Pacific. So actually to ensure the kind of free trade for all in the region. Then there is a clean economy concept to actually make economic gains through supporting the achievement of climate goals, as well as, for example, Paris Agreement. Or for example, the fair economy to actually work against the anti-corruption. Remember this fair economy specifically. And the reason for that is because if you look in this particular reason, just look at the kind of trade which these countries are having and their GDP. as in comparison to China. So all of these countries are hugely dependent with their trade in China, and this basically initiative thus forms part of what? The delinking of supply chain initiative of the US government, where they are actually trying to do what? They are trying to de-link themselves or their dependence on China. That is also basically a kind of initiative which you guys might be hearing called as China Plus One initiative by the European countries as well. In this framework, there comes a very important fair economy pillar agreement, where the article today suggests that with India becoming a signatory to this Indo-Pacific economic framework, fair economy pillar, which basically mandates that all the trade partners will prevent and combat the corruption, including bribery. The US indictment, recent indictment of Adani Group has actually may expose our country to the scrutiny by any of the partners, including the US. So what does this specific fair economy pillar actually includes? It includes that, let's say for example, these countries shall take kind of efforts to actually curb down the corruption, including bribery, which actually erodes stable economic order. And these countries shall actually work together to accelerate progress on anti-corruption measures, where let's say for example the US has a specific act called as Foreign Corruption Practices Act, which actually applies to non-US entities like Adani as well. So the US can actually ask India to actually kind of put pressure on Adani to actually go under the trial under this act, and India will have to adhere to that. Is there an obligation? Remember, there is no obligation. Why? Because member states shall be asked to enhance the effectiveness of law enforcement, but it is only a consultative process and not compulsion, right? Because it is not a kind of an agreement which has been signed by the countries like our country. Also, one issue can arise because there is a provision of asset recovery as a remedial measure in the corruption cases as well, which can be applied to Adani. So remember this IPF, remember this fair economy pillar, and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to learn about a very important scheme of the government, and that is MGNREGA or Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of important government schemes. So let's first try to have a quick overlook at the specific provisions of the scheme. The scheme, which was actually launched in the year of 2005 and functions under the Ministry of Rural Development, what it guarantees? It basically guarantees 100 days of unskilled manual employment in every financial year. So the idea is what? Let's say for example, imagine a village. In that village, a pond has to be created in the premises of, let's say for example, a primary school. So unskilled labor from that particular region within the vicinity of that or from that rural village will be employed for the next working days, and they will be paid a kind of a daily wage. For this, the Aadhaar identification has been made mandatory by the government under the Aadhaar Act of 2018. This employment will be provided to every adult member of any rural household. The scheme specifically suggests that 33% of the beneficiaries has to be women. And the scheme says that there is a kind of a legal right of work which is being provided to these workers, that let's say for example, if I am going to ask for the work and I do not get work within 15 days, then the government is also going to pay me a kind of an unemployment allowance. The kind of days which are being offered by the government, that has been 100 days. But if you look at the average days of employment per household, just see it has been ranging around 40 to 50 only, as low as 42 in the year of 2022. During the pandemic time, that actually the average actually increased. Then it is basically a demand driven scheme which ensures legal right to work. There is an unemployment allowance as well. 33% beneficiaries has to be women. There is a kind of a decentralized planning system through the Panchayati Raj institution. The scheme also provides for a social audit by the Gram Sabha under section 17 clause A. The funding is actually shared between the center and the state, and there is an assurance of work site facilities and 10% travel allowance as well, and then there is a creation of ombudsperson for the grievance redressal. But because of the high demands from the rural areas, because of the kind of unemployment which exists there, the demand has actually surpassed the kind of supply of the work which is being created by the government. And that is why 21 out of 25 states have actually utilized 100% of the allocated funds under the MGNREGA by the October 2029 in the year of 2022 itself. Just look at the percentage of allocated funds under MGNREGA and the percentage which was utilized. That is was around 135% in Himachal Pradesh, 97% in UP, 137% in Andhra Pradesh. So obviously it shows what? It shows that there is a lot of unskilled workers in the rural areas and the large scale unemployment which exists there. Now the article today specifically talks about the calculation of wages. The calculation of wages for these MGNREGA workers is done by Ministry of Rural Development, and these wages are revised what? As annually. It is being calculated on what? On consumer price index for agriculture labor, that is CPI-AL, the base year for which is what? Year of 1986-87. Right? Almost few years and 40 years will take place. So a parliamentary panel has actually made a strong case for increasing the wages of these MGNREGA workers because they are not in consonance with the rising cost of living. Because if you look at the year of 2024, the wage actually increased only 28 rupees per day. With Haryana is actually paying one MGNREGA worker the highest wage in the country per day, and that is only 374 rupees, that is approximately 10,000 rupees a month. Or Arunachal and Nagaland, which are actually paid the lowest in the country. So remember this issue of wage calculation under MGNREGA, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are actually going to learn about the ASHA workers, the ASHA or the Accredited Social Health Activists. These ASHA workers were actually created as a kind of a professional healthcare workforce who actually belong to these rural areas, and they actually they are trained by the government agencies. So they basically provide what? They basically provide kind of basic essential medical provisions at the grassroots level. They were created first under the National Rural Health Mission 2005 and 6, and then they were introduced to the urban areas as well under the National Urban Health Mission 2013. The idea of creation of such rural trained workforce to actually provide the primary healthcare services was actually inspired from the Alma-Ata Declaration 1978 on primary healthcare, but is specifically modeled on the Mitani initiative of the Chhattisgarh government, which was taken in the year of 2002, where they basically act as the first point of contact to cater the health requirement of deprived section. These ASHA workers are preferably between 25 to 45 years old, and they shall be literate, so at least 10th class graduate. However, there is relaxation. It's not like a compulsory provision, remember this. Now these ASHA workers, they act as the largest community healthcare program. Currently, we have around 10.5 lakh ASHA workers in the country. But remember that these ASHA workers are considered as a voluntary workforce, and thus they are not recognized as a government worker. So it's not like they are government employees and they are being paid by the government on that basis. Their payment is actually decided on the kind of a work-based model. So let's say, for example, if I am as an ASHA worker is enrolling a woman for pregnancy or delivery in institution, then I will be paid around rupees 600 for that particular delivery. So if you look at the average salary of the ASHA workers across the country, that is only around 5,000 rupees. What is the context of the news today? The context says that the backbone of India's primary healthcare system, the ASHA workers, will soon be adding another crucial task, and that will be to deputed to collect vital data to help AI identify the breast cancer risk factors and patterns specific to Indian women. And they basically handle tasks like, for example, vaccination, health reviews in the remotest of locations in our country. The breast cancer has emerged as a major problem in our country, such as, for example, 1.38 million new breast cancer cases taking place every year. Every 4 minutes, an Indian woman is diagnosed with breast cancer. One woman dies of breast cancer every 30 minutes in India. So it is a very serious issue. And for that purpose, we are actually deploying the ASHA workers and integrating the artificial intelligence as well. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.